So he says, like, we embrace image magnifying video to project larger than life pastors and worship leaders, never asking what other messages of technology, mostly used at rock concerts and political rallies, might be communicating to our congregations. We import chest-rattling subwoofers and fog machines. Leaders read on stage from smartphones and tablets. Worship ministries distribute style guides for what the band members should wear on stage. In parentheses, I'm not making this up, and he was part of those bands before he became a journalist. And we gather in windowless, climate-controlled environments that stop time like a movie theater or a casino.
Yep.
And I think what he's trying to say is, like, when we use these mediums, especially the medium of the celebrity and the medium of the well-known and the medium of the efficiency, all this stuff, it is actually shaping us. And we don't notice it, of course, because first and foremost, that's how it's done in the culture, right? That's what works in the culture. And then we bring it in because we think this will get people in, this will get people where they're at, but we're not taking stock enough of how this is forming us. Welcome back to Jesus versus America. Jesus told us that we couldn't serve two masters, but so many of us are trying to serve the American culture while trying to follow Jesus. I'm John, and I'm joined by my good friends Monique and Wisdom, and together we represent three generations that are trying to faithfully follow Jesus. We're going through a series where we examine some of the idols in the American culture so that we can see where those things seep into the church. And today we're talking about the American Idol of celebrity. And that almost sounds like I'm repeating myself because American Idol is one of those shows that has turned so many people into celebrities and becomes
Shout out Carrie Underwood.
The whole focus of the show, right? In some ways, like, you hope you go, you win, and then you become a celebrity and it launches your career because it seems like you can't really get very far unless you're a celebrity. And we seem to make everyone in every industry a celebrity. I mean, maybe you're not even in the entertainment industry. Like business leaders, there are celebrities among business leaders. And, you know, there's times when we have celebrities among scientists, you know, like we have these. So I think the first thing we should say is probably, like all the other idols we're looking at, we're probably the contributing factor. I don't think celebrities make themselves and say, hey, I'm a celebrity.
Literally can't.
They can't do that. They need a following. And I think it's because we have a need to have celebrities and we feel something about them so that maybe we want to actually worship them. We actually want to venerate them somehow. And maybe that's why this is an easy idol to identify in the American culture. But I'd like to hear from you guys on what are some of the idols and the ways that celebrity kind of works itself out in the American culture. Like, where do you see it in our day-to-day lives outside the church or even just around it? Where do you see it?
Fandoms.
Oh, yeah.
Fandoms. I grew up in the, like, mid 2000s being a teen, and fandoms have been, I know they've been around since forever. People went crazy for Elvis and the Beatles, but something about
NSYNC versus Backstreet Boys.
Yeah, exactly.
Christina Aguilera or Britney Spears.
Exactly. And there's something, though, I think I'll speak for myself, like, where fandoms became a group that was connected to one another, especially digitally, and would come and rally together in praise of this one celebrity, and it became a whole culture. So take Swifties, for example, the whole Swiftie movement.
Yeah,
like,
that's a big one.
Massive, right? And then you get that following for a celebrity, and people like political figures will try to take them to utilize them for gain. So endorsements would be another example, or targeting fandoms for what do they do with the Swiftie stuff? Like the bracelets. Like there's like tangible
when it really
things.
becomes, I mean, I'm sure there are
It's a
already
culture,
studies.
it's a world.
It's a subculture, right? I'm sure there are already studies that sociologists are are making into that.
Have you heard of that, John?
I have not heard of that. I'm probably two generations removed, right?
You know fanfic?
I know fanfic, but those people aren't getting famous. Most of them.
No, they're writing fiction for the
stories
celebrity.
they love, or the celebrity. Or,
I mean,
like,
I think like so that was around when I was there. Like, I see my daughter now, like, in that, and it's just like almost like continuing to live with those characters and those things because you don't want to let them go. And it is kind of interesting to us because, I mean, there is something where you say, I really like a certain character. I really like a certain person. I kind of follow them because I think their insights are good. I think it crosses over a different way, though, when you say, and we start to believe, like, if that person endorsed it, you use the word endorsement, if that person endorses something, all of the people who like them will also like the same thing. And of course, it's true. It's not like it's untrue.
Yeah.
Like you could say Michael Jordan's going to endorse a certain thing, and then
Michael Jordan's going to wear Jordans.
Right. And we expect everyone's going to buy them, and it actually happens because people think, and I don't think anybody's thinking, if I wear those, I'll become like him. They're just thinking like, I really like him. I'd like to wear something that reflects him.
Not even on a subconscious level, though, because I do think there is a piece of that to celebrity. I think society is prescribing what you should be and like what you should attain. And then someone comes along that represents it like perfectly and you want to be like them. That's the whole idolizing thing. That's what makes it an idol.
It's true for women celebrities and makeup products. Ariana Grande, Rihanna, Selena Gomez.
I can wear the same lipstick, or it's her
foundation
lipstick
as her, and I will have the same complexion.
Yeah, and it's like this unattainable life that people idolize, and then you feel like you can have a piece of it. Like, I can't live in your mansion, but I can wear a perfume that like you wear,
or I can know about your life, or I can follow you, or I can feel like
I'm your friend,
you.
and like it's very it's weird.
Yeah, but
it's kind of creepy when you really think about
I want to smell
it.
like you.
Yeah, or like, or just the idea of you feel like you know them, like it's too familiar. Like I saw an interesting interview that talked about like the difference between movie stars and TV stars and like how they interacted with their fandom, and TV felt more accessible because it was in your home. And like, people come up to me and they really think that they know me and I'm their friend. And
same with musicians. That's why you'll see the fans posters of like, thank you for saving my life. But like a big movie star wouldn't get that kind of poster. They'll get something like your work, whatever.
I think it does say something about us. Like when, like when I was in law school, I was in Malibu, which is a place where lots of stars live. And what I found was a strange phenomenon would happen is I would see people that were famous, that were celebrities, and like accidentally, not even intentionally, I would walk by them and go, hey, how are you doing? And then I'd realize I don't know them, but I thought I knew them because they were all over the place and I like knew things about them, a person I'd never actually met or seen. Yeah. But in that moment of like almost like a reflex without thinking, you almost did something strange, which is, and I think it would confuse them like crazy because they think, should I know you? Like, what's going on with that?
There's like this weird, maybe not weird, maybe it makes sense if you really break it down. There's just like this need for acceptance too, popularity, acceptance, being one of something, being validated. Yeah. So I think it's twofold. I think you can be a fan of someone for those reasons and enter fandom for those reasons. But I think the thing that's really different, that's scary, that's been up and coming since YouTube first came out and people could put themselves on. My in-law is a teacher, and I remember her telling me a story that like all of a sudden there was a shift in like around the year 2000 where you'd ask a kid like, what do you want to be? And it was no longer a doctor, a fireman, a teacher, famous. Yeah. Famous for what? Yeah. Famous for what?
Content creator.
Just famous or an influencer. One of the kids told her, I want to be an unboxer, and she had no idea what that was. And it is linked to self-esteem and validation, and we idolize and we want to be idolized. And we idolize a celebrity because we want to be a celebrity, and it seeps into the church because you want that celebrity pastor that everyone knows and likes and is cool, and that's my pastor. Like, it can seep into the church that way too. Yeah.
But when we idolize celebrities, what happens is they're a symbol of something, right? Like, so you think go back to an example of a sports team. Like, you idolize a certain player on the team. Part of what you're saying when you tell people how much you like so-and-so and, love watching them play is you're saying like, that's my team. That's what I'm behind. Right. Yeah. And we see that happening, not just in church, but even outside. Like you say, the reason I'm a fan of that person is because they represent something about myself. Like, I want people to know
where I'm from.
I align with that person.
You just took me to therapy because I don't consider myself a fan of anything. And you started saying that and I was like, Gene Kelly, dear God, I'll watch everything that man does and look at his steps, and it's because I'm a dancer and I want to dance like
Yep.
that. And
So
he's like my number one inspiration.
It's a shorthand way of identifying yourself to people. Like
That's
you could
crazy.
explain all the things that you are and what you like, or you could say like, I
you
follow
can just
so
name
and so,
it, and they get it. They're
Right.
like, oh, I know who you are.
Like
I'm a
I
Swiftie.
respect
Oh,
so and
I
so.
know
Yeah,
who
right.
you are.
It's a shorthand, and
Yeah.
it is kind of again like
Where are my people at?
Throughout this series, we keep reminding there's nothing wrong inherently with saying I align with so and so. Now these days, it's mostly political figures that you're a fan of, right?
Definitely political.
They become
art.
celebrities,
Yeah.
right? And so you say, well, like if I could just describe myself in like 2 or 3 words, I like so and so, right? That's my person. And then everybody's like, oh, I know where to place you and categorize you in the thing. And actually, what's interesting is most people don't like to be placed and categorized. But when we're telling people about celebrities, we are asking,
True.
Like, I just want to tell you where I am. And I'm using the North Star is this celebrity who like works their way backwards.
Or you love the fact that someone is saying something you identify with on a massive public, national, or international level. You're like, yeah, I'm all about that. And you're the spokesperson that is getting that message out. That is very...
There's a danger
appealing.
when you put them on a podium, because in American culture with celebrities,
we like to knock them down.
I can tell that it has inflated so much because of the disappointment and the shock when they fail us morally.
Yeah.
It's like, what? Like, so-and-so had an affair with a married person? Oh, like you're devastated.
Or so recently in the news, so-and-so got arrested for having sex with underage minors or whatever.
Right.
Like, oh, I mean, you think to yourself like, wait a minute, now everybody can't listen to their music anymore and has to like get rid of any affiliations. And so that's hard, I think. But I think sometimes it's hard on them. I mean, to suddenly wake up one day and realize that all these people are scrutinizing your life. And
because maybe they didn't sign up to be the moral example. Maybe they just wanted to be a rapper, a singer, a dancer, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I'm going to just be real clear for the people watching. We do not mean that about criminals. Like it's hard on them for being a criminal. No.
I mean, people
or
who
alleged criminals or whoever. But I do think it is hard on them. And I do think... which is why you see so many of them implode, and it's really sad. It's like, how many documentaries do we have to watch before we stop doing this to them? But we as a society like to build up and tear down, and we want to build you up because we aspire, and then you have too much, and then we want to tear you down to feel like we can have it, like, or whatever it is.
These
it's
are our
that
modern
cycle.
heroes. We want heroes. We want people to cheer on and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And again, I've seen it outside of the entertainment industry, outside of media, out of social media, outside of influence. I've seen it in business. I'm seeing it all over the place where,
well, now billionaires are celebrities. You got Elon Musk.
Right. And they're brands. They become brands, not just, like they
brands.
lend themselves and they lend their platform.
Just be a businessman. Like,
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So let's pivot to talk about how this moves into the church. And I'm going to put a temporary restriction on us, because the easiest place to go is just say celebrity pastors, right? But that's obvious, and we're going to get there. But I think, are there other places where we see this complete idol of celebrity coming into the church? Because one thing I want to point out is knowing that people are somewhat well-known is not new. Right? There have always been well-known people, even within the church. Like you could just take somebody like Billy Graham, right? Like, is Billy Graham a celebrity?
Yes.
I mean, to some people, he might have been. To other people, his fame came because he just kept doing this thing that was working, and he kept doing it, right? And so it's hard sometimes to peel those apart. Like if you think about this person, like everybody might know, like Tim Keller, everybody might know some name that you go, oh, and the question we have to ask is that, do we just know them because they're good at what they do, because they've lived a faithful life, because they had an impact on people? Or is it because, again, it just lined us up, it told us who we were, we needed heroes all the time? So I think it's easy sometimes to just go immediately to personalities in the church, but there are examples where there have been people who they got to be well known because they lived a faithful life over many, many years and did something
Mother
so people
Teresa.
used them. Yeah, there's an example. Like, I don't think she went out and said, I'd love to be an influencer. I'd love to be well known for what I do. So I think celebrity in the church is more like those celebrities who are just known for being known. Like maybe a good example would be like Kim Kardashian. Like I don't know what she ever did, but she was really well known, and now she's used that.
It's a good thing you don't know what she did.
Whatever she did,
I know what she did. Know what
she's like one of those people that's like well known for being well known, and like so. So then it becomes an end to itself. Like my platform, my celebrity, and all those things is like the end of itself, right? As opposed to a byproduct of having done an amazing thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if someone writes a good work or makes a good work that is life-changing or provides some sort of clarity to theology that wasn't there, or makes strides, or has found some new manuscript or interpreted it in a better way that, yeah, I mean, if you get notoriety for something like that, that kind of makes sense to me in terms of like church. But I do think some people will kind of give celebrity to someone within the church because they're representing something they want so badly to be at the forefront, whether it's right or wrong. And they're like, yeah, that's the new way. Like, that's the new Christian. We're all going to identify with that camp. Kind of like who wrote Love Wins?
I'm just blanked on his name.
Oh, me too.
Rob Bell.
Rob Bell. Okay. So that was like, for a while, this dividing camp, like, we're the Rob Bell Christians, or what, you know what I mean? Or like this. And I do think sometimes people want to hitch themselves to an ideal, whether or not, and I'm not making a commentary, so don't come for me of whether that holds water right now. I'm just saying, like, when someone comes along with something that finally says something that either makes it easier for you or that you identify with, or it's like finally this voice within the church, that celebrity goes, and we will like identify ourselves with that.
Are you saying we can't talk about celebrity pastors on this? Is that a
No,
boundary?
I'm going to say in a few minutes we will. You know,
Right.
like because
Right.
I mean, for example, there's areas where we don't have to talk about the celebrity pastors themselves. There's things in us, like for example, I think that many of us only know a church by its pastor and not by
Sure.
the name of the church. Like
Yeah.
somebody goes, I go to blank blank church. You go, whose church is that? You want to know whose church it is, because you wouldn't
Name
know
dropping.
the
Yeah.
name of the church unless you knew the person
pastor.
behind it. And
Yeah.
that's not about them. That's about us.
Yeah.
Right.
That we know nothing. Even
Cult
the
of
churches we
celebrity.
attend,
Yeah.
even like if we think about our own way of looking
Yeah.
at celebrity, like I would say if you go around to the church that we attend or any other church, go, hey, what denomination are we? Like, what are our doctrines? Like, you know nothing about it except who leads it or who's the
Yeah.
pastor or who's
Yeah.
preaching. That's in us somehow,
Because
right?
we like to follow people.
And then when that pastor falls, the whole church falls
Yeah.
apart because it was all built on that
On that person.
personality.
Right, but we built it on that.
Yeah.
Like you know, like if a pastor, you know, they started a church, like people have to come
Yeah.
and create a celebrity out of them, right?
Does this count as celebrity seeping into church? Like, we love when an actual celebrity,
Yes.
like a movie star, becomes a
Why?
Christian. And
Why do you think that?
because it'll
You know,
make God
it
famous.
gives well they'll say like that's another thing we can touch in a few minutes, where it's like, I want to
Wanna
be
make
famous
I
so
wanna
that I
Right,
can
right.
God
give
famous.
that.
Yeah.
And not famous pastor, but a famous whatever singer, actor, so that I can spread.
Yeah.
And
Oh
it
my
goes by the
gosh.
guise of like spreading the word. No, but like, I don't know. People in Hollywood that become a Christian or always were, and I don't.
And they're
do
like
I
one
name
among
drop
50,
now?
right? But we like hang on to that.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
there's some of them, and some of them are crazy. I'm not going to
Yeah.
name drop because some of them are crazy, and I could
Yeah.
give some examples of things that they say that
but
I
we
actually
cling on to
thunk-
it because they said, I thank God
Yeah.
once at the
and
Grammys.
or who was that football player that was like terrible at football, but became like the poster
Tim
child?
Tebow?
Yeah, thank you. Became
He's
the
so
poster.
terrible at football.
Well, I mean, he's better than me, right? But I mean, he wasn't known for anything other than the fact that he kneeled.
And people would take the picture
right.
like, no, it's weird. No, it's
Get wrecked,
it's
Tim.
strange. This
But
is how
why?
celebrity.
I think it's
it
because
validates.
Yes.
It validates. It's like, see, it's cool. See, it's real.
Yep.
See,
Yeah.
Steph
I'm
Curry
right.
and his family
Right.
also for basketball.
But
Yeah.
this is what's so
I love
odd.
him secretly,
We
really.
are like looking for the needle in the haystack on this. Like, you know, there could be like 70, 80 people
the
in that
Russells.
movie. One of them is a Christian, and suddenly we find some validation in that.
Yeah.
We're not thinking, oh, thank God that they're following Jesus. We're thinking like, there's one for my team.
Yeah.
Like I feel validated.
Yeah.
It's
Because
like winning.
yeah, but that's the thing. If you were just to play the numbers, you go, what about the other like 50 people that are on that team, or all those people who don't do that, right?
Right.
Who aren't that, like, does
who
that
aren't
mean they,
showboating it? Who aren't like?
yeah, I do think it's about
who
validating
aren't
us.
flouncing it around for cred and adoration and who knows what else. And
Yeah, I think first and foremost, before we get the platform, I think first and foremost, it's a validation of us. and this is interesting because I was looking in the history of, there's that organization called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which was started,
FCA.
I think, it was started like in, I don't know, 50s, 60s, around that time.
This is news to me, by the way.
Yeah. So this is big. It's still going. It's on lots of campuses, high school campuses, college campuses.
Why don't I know about this? Okay.
The guy who started it, what's his
All
name?
right.
Yeah, Dan McLennan. He basically said, his quote when he first started was, if athletes can endorse, so that's kind of like the influencer thing that we do now. If athletes can endorse shaving cream, razor blades, and cigarettes, so the time period we're talking about, before there were millennials that didn't shave and before like cigarettes were like uncool. But if athletes can endorse shaving cream, razor blades, and cigarettes, surely they can endorse the Lord. I think that came from a very good place, but it's one of those subtle things where you don't realize that what you just said is it works in the American culture, so let's make it work in the church.
You're selling this, so sell God.
Endorse God.
Yep, endorse Jesus. Now, to his credit, he eventually left the organization pretty early on because he realized it wasn't becoming deeply rooted enough and in discipleship, and it was just trying to get people who are fans of Jesus. And I'm summarizing that. He didn't say that. I'm just kind of paraphrasing.
That's a very interesting phrase. He said a fan of Jesus.
But that's the thing. There were more like, there weren't followers, there were fans.
Right. Oh my God.
And I think what's interesting is, but that might be why. Like if you started the whole premise of the organization, which is like we can have endorsements for Jesus, you might get a very shallow group of fan base who are following Jesus, right? And when you start asking for harder things or
shallow.
Right. So that, and to this day, like, I'm not saying that the work of FCA is like wrong. I'm just saying it's based on the premise that lots of high school people who've heard of celebrities, they'll bring in somebody who's a high school. Yeah, they'll bring in a celebrity sports figure. Oh my gosh,
my Christian elementary school brought in an Olympian.
Yeah.
It must have been part of that
probably something like that where they go like, hey, this person won this or is this
This
or
person
whatever.
was a third place skier in the county ski thing, but they love Jesus, so you should too.
And I think what's strange is like, what about like everybody else who doesn't like? So if one person on a movie
close to me, it's like we're selling our faith.
Well,
we're like
this is America. We sell everything. Like we market it, brand it, package it together, and sell it, right? And in this case, you think this is good, but it ignores the logic of the fact that like if one person on the team is following Jesus and 50 are not, like what do I do with that? Like when somebody comes out and says, I don't believe that there's a God, we just write them off. Go, that guy doesn't count, but this one counts. And I think that's just our ability to
just
filter
even the way
out
that
all
we
information.
value people too, which is not a biblical thing.
Yeah. When I was researching this is not, of course, a new issue at all in the church, even going all the way back. Like I was reading an article where somebody was pointing to Augustine's Confessions, when he wrote the Confessions, which was in 397 AD. He was wrestling with a recent convert to Christianity. His name was Victorinus, and he was a very, very well-known philosopher. I mean, a celebrity philosopher, if there ever was one in his time, who's known throughout the Roman world in his writings, and he converted to Christianity. And Augustine is wrestling with whether this is good or bad. Like, he's the same thing. Like, we got Tim Tebow. Now we got this guy, like he's converted, we have Kirk Cameron. That should just end the whole thing right there.
That's the one I was trying not to say. It's out there.
We got him,
We
clearly.
got him.
Clearly, that should just
I don't think
settle
Gen Z
the
knows
issue.
who Kirk Cameron
That's
is.
good.
They're better
That's good.
off.
Don't look it up. But he was wrestling with whether this is good or bad for the church, and he ultimately concluded that it was good, even though he wrestles for several chapters with
Because the people that followed him are like, this guy loves the Lord.
Right. And he said the influence that comes from that
But
outweighs,
he was a thinker.
Yeah, but then you can use that. It gives you some mileage. Like here's this famous philosopher who's come to Christ. And by the way, this is still going on. We herald several philosophers in the 20th century who were atheists, and then they suddenly became Christians. We do this all the time, right? Because it validates us again.
I'm guilty of loving those stories, by the way.
I know.
When like the astrophysicist had come to know the Lord through his work.
God. I didn't believe in him.
I'm like, eat it up.
Yep. Famous New York Times columnist that recently came to faith, and then everybody is like, oh, this is a victory. It's like, never mind the, 100 other people that work there that didn't do that.
And then you have the like Mr. Rogers and John Woodens of the world that just lived a Christian life and just Wooden taught his athletes based on his principle, but he wasn't touting Christianity. And they all say that he changed their lives, and he was the winningest coach in NCAA history. And he was like, you play better on the court if you like who you are off the court, like all these, right? And we were on a flight once, And there was someone sitting next to me that had these really cool rainbow Converse. I'm like, oh my God, that looks like the LGBTQ Dodger hat that like I liked and I was looking at. And as soon as I said that, she like felt safe. And the last person I would think, she's on her way to an LGBTQ retreat, she goes, you know who a real Christian, out of nowhere, a real Christian was? Mr. Rogers. Now that was a real Christian, and all these things, why, like what he did, how he lived, and he was not touting this from the mountaintop. And it even reached that community, which a lot of Christians might have an issue with. And like someone there is seeing the Lord, and it's not through pandering.
Well, we've fallen to the temptation of thinking, and I know you've commented on this in a previous episode, which is like we have this temptation to think if I had a platform, like God is served by that. And by the way, that can be true. Like God can you can use that platform. So,
or you're dragging his name through the mud, depending on.
Or you built it for your own purposes or you are trying to make it in that industry and you keep saying to yourself, like, if I make it, I'll be able to tell people about God, you know.
Makes you feel better about it.
And maybe that's even true. Maybe you're even honest about it. Like if I became that star athlete, if I became that movie star, if I was that singer, if I was that titan in business, like I would tell everybody about Jesus, and that might even be true. But again,
it might not lead them to
the subtlety again is
him,
you are saying like, so the purpose of platform and everything is to reach this influence, which is what Augustine's wrestling with. Like he becomes influential and it has a reach. But you know, when you think about like the early church, even in that part, they could have sought platform, but that wasn't the way of Jesus. It wasn't the way of the Apostle Paul.
No,
like,
it was inefficient ministry. Actually, it wasn't to the masses as much as we think it was. And so he doesn't need you today to be efficient with your,
but man, like, do we love it.
It's easy.
They think that like you have to like make him famous as if this is not like a rich history that comes behind our faith. Never mind the millions and
the rich history.
The resources the authors who have come out of this, the people groups that, you know, like,
the
life today need to make Jesus famous.
Life shattering in a good way.
Arrogant. It's I think be an example, yes, in whatever sphere of influence you have daily, not until you get to a certain platform with a certain number of followers to just say God is good
and maybe not even waking up with this pious notion. I don't know. You can tell me if you think I'm wrong. We're like, I'm gonna go out and live a certain way just to convert all these people, as opposed to I'm gonna be obedient to God today, and I'm gonna live my day today asking him to be connected to how I think, what I say, how I treat people, just out of an obedience, and not like this illusion of grandeur, like I'm gonna go out and it's like for the numbers I can win, because that's also a temptation that's kind of gross.
I mean, why doesn't God choose to work with that in the way that the church began? Like if you look at the very beginnings, like the Apostle Paul goes on these missionary journeys and he plants a couple of small churches. And within 300 years, the Roman Empire is almost required to convert to Christianity because so many people have come to faith that it just becomes politically expedient that the whole empire that was opposed to it suddenly becomes Christian. And it's spread, like you said, like table to table, house to house, you know, like relationship to relationship, family. Yep. It was very inefficient, right? For, you know, think like, why not just, you know, do it some other way? I always remember that the Apostle Paul eventually is arrested and he makes his case to Caesar. Early on, like this is in the first century still. And I wonder if he's thinking, you know what would be the greatest way to convert the empire is I go and I convert Caesar and we argue this out. And then Caesar tells everybody, I'm a Christian now, you know, and everybody goes, oh, let's be Christians, right? Because Caesar's Christian. That's not the way God worked.
Conversion of the heart. That's not, or if you command it, this is legally the religion. So now, you know what I mean? Like that's not going to do anything for anyone's heart or soul.
I like that, you know, the Roman Empire ultimately almost is like required to convert, you know, because so many people have learned this way, seen what the Christians have done in the small, inefficient ways, like caring for the sick.
Steady and consistent way.
Over the whole time. And it just keeps spreading and spreading. I mean, that's what Jesus said. It's like yeast. You put it in the dough. There's no stopping it after that. It's just like little tiny thing. But once it's in there, it's just going to keep spreading and spreading and spreading. And it might not be on your timetable, but I think we like efficiency. That's another idol we might examine. So celebrity works really great when someone just says, well, so-and-so. So I think that shows different angles. Like we're the ones creating these celebrities. I think we're the ones that like want to be validated by them. I think we want to believe what they say. We want to identify with them. And this is happening in the church. And now I'll say, okay, restriction removed. We can talk about celebrity pastors if you want to, because I think that's probably the most obvious one. But I think I read this very sad article where it was the pastor who came in after the celebrity pastor left. And there was no fall, there was no scandal. He just left.
Yeah.
And he was just writing about what it was like to basically pastor a church that was falling apart because the person they had all erected as the tent pole, was gone, and now it's just all coming down. Yeah. And it's the same thing where people they didn't know what the church believed, they didn't know its doctrine, they just knew they went to the church that so and so led, and when so and so wasn't there anymore, almost the whole purpose of existing was no longer there. And I think that's kind of beyond just when pastors fall, just when pastors do well and move on, it's actually harming in a lot of ways to the churches because they're attracting the very hearts of us who love to hero worship. And now we have a new hero we can worship and tell people, I go to so-and-so's church.
We give pastors platform and praise for their personality more than their integrity and their character. I like this pastor more because they're funnier and because they're more charming, and forget
they're charismatic. They can speak to thousands.
They're charismatic. And you know what? I think God does use those people too and can, but if it's solely on that, first of all, that's setting up that individual for failure because you're not checking them and checking what's going on in their household and in their lives, and then they're going to fall because they're human beings, and then everything else falls.
You're risking the entire institution if you question them or do something if you investigate and find that you don't like where their heart is at or you think they need a break. You're thinking, I can't do that. We can't do that. Literally, the whole structure will fall apart. It's been built on them.
It's all built on celebrity.
And then never mind, and then not acknowledging the individual in the church that has integrity, that has accountability, that has good moral character, that has a heart for people. They might not be as charming or good looking or charismatic as the other
And then
one.
what does that say to people? So you're saying okay, so you go to a church where there's thousands, and the person who's up there is charismatic. They're a great speaker. They're so stylish. They're really good looking. And you're basically communicating to everybody there that if you want to make an impact for the kingdom, if you want to have a platform, if you want God to use you, you have to be good looking, stylish, charismatic, even if everything about you follows the Lord.
Showing up to Sunday in my Louboutins.
Yeah. And so
red bottoms.
You are you're signaling to everybody that, you know what, there's certain work you can do in the church, like stand at the door and greet, or that's what you can do, but you can't do what that person does because you're none of those things, And then of course, sadly, we agree. We're like, you're right. I'm not that good looking. I can't do those things. We just totally agree with it.
It harms the congregant, and then it also harms that individual that we elevate and their families as well, because then they have no place to be real and they can't be human, and you're giving them way too much power, and it's too much pressure for anybody.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of people, myself first and foremost, I want to be very clear, myself first and foremost, whose competence exceeds their character, right? I mean, that's just a reality. And the problem, though, is then we elevate those people and tell everybody that your competence does need to exceed everything else. And you have no real, you can have the side jobs in the church. You could have, God could maybe still use you as some of the leftovers, but the real people that are the stars, that's the ones that God is going to reach. When someone says hey, I preached this sermon and 1 million people saw it, and then, or I wrote this book and all these people read it, you start to think to yourself well, what could I do? What could I offer the Lord? Even though the Lord works through.
If it's not on that stage, if it's not on that level, if it hasn't gone viral,
and we love efficiency. I might speak to 5 people. I might speak to 20 people, right? They're speaking to thousands or if not millions, right? So I can't really offer much to the Lord because I'm only speaking with a few people. What's my life amount to?
That's another thing too on celebrity pastors. I love collecting books on Christian thought and Christian thinking, and I notice a difference on the books that I like, where the cover is just the title. Yeah. And then when you go to a bookstore and the Christian section, there's going to be one side that's just titles, and then another one that's faces, right? The entire face right there plastered in the front. They don't wait to put it in the flap on the inside on what they are, but they put it
because
in the
they're already a brand,
that's what sells.
and it draws, and people know what they're going to get, and they want to support.
And usually those books don't have the good stuff in them anyways. The ones with the big faces on it.
Because it's a fandom there too. It's a fandom there too.
We have to be careful of this idea that when you have a platform, even if you don't fall, even if you steward it faithfully, even if you didn't even seek it, it was just somehow handed to you, that this is beneficial for the faith and all the people who are following it. I'm not saying it's not good. all in every case. What I'm saying is we don't even think whether it's good. We don't stop to think like, okay, so I'm using this and is this beneficial, or even are there downsides to it? You know, I was reading from Mike Cosper, who is the one behind the podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And this is actually not about Mars Hill. He was just talking about the way we unthinkingly adopt all these efficiencies in our church. Like we have a celebrity pastor who's beamed to 21, satellite locations, or they put out their, we watch all their sermons and we've never met them, don't know them. And he says, it doesn't take into account what it's doing to us. So he says, like, we embrace image magnifying video to project larger than life pastors and worship leaders, never asking what other messages of technology, mostly used at rock concerts and political rallies, might be communicating to our congregations. We import chest-rattling subwoofers and fog machines. Leaders read on stage from smartphones and tablets. Worship ministries distribute style guides for what the band members should wear on stage. In parentheses, I'm not making this up, and he was part of those bands before he became a journalist. And we gather in windowless, climate-controlled environments that stop time like a movie theater or a casino.
Yep.
And I think what he's trying to say is, like, when we use these mediums, especially the medium of the celebrity and the medium of the well-known and the medium of the efficiency, all this stuff, it is actually shaping us. And we don't notice it, of course, because first and foremost, that's how it's done in the culture, right? That's what works in the culture. And then we bring it in because we think this will get people in, this will get people where they're at, but we're not taking stock enough of how this is forming us and what it does. And I think when you walk into a room and there's a person on a stage way over there and there's a light on them and you're sitting in a soft theater seat, you just feel like in that moment, like, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to sit back and be quiet and just listen and sometimes maybe adore or be validated or feel like, okay, this is something that I'm going to take. So we're not considering like the impact on the congregation.
Right.
We're not considering the impact on the celebrity themselves, and then maybe that they shouldn't be or they don't deserve it, or even if they do, that it's actually harming them. We're not considering the impact on the church after that celebrity is no longer there, or even just our witness. You know, the fact that we're walking around telling everybody whose church we go to, not, it's almost like
weird. And that's an experience, by the way, I've been having a lot recently, where people will lead with like, this is my pastor.
Church, yep.
This is,
Yeah, they go, I go to this church. Like, what church is that? They go, oh, it's that person's church. Like, it belongs to them. Like, oh, okay, I know where you're on the map now. But that was what we were talking about earlier. Like, it's a shorthand way of identifying us, right? Like, just like we say, oh, I follow Taylor Swift. So everybody goes, oh, I know who you are. Now we're using the pastors in the same way. Like, oh, I follow so-and-so. Right. Or I'm reading so-and-so. Like, oh, I got you figured out. Like, I got you, girl. I know what it's all about.
Yeah.
Right.
Or maybe you're that. And then there's like, oh, I can link up with you.
Right.
Like, you and I alliance because of this shared thing.
Yeah. So what do we make of it? I mean, of course, like everything else in this series, we're saying pay attention.
Yeah.
Like we see it in the American culture. We might laugh at it. Pay attention to where it is in us.
Yeah.
In the church. What will it mean? Maybe we think about it from this perspective. Like, how often did Jesus in the Gospels tell someone not to tell anybody about the miracle? Not to tell anybody that he is, when they identified him as the Messiah, he instructed them not to tell anybody, right? Again, if you're trying to start a whole movement of God's kingdom on earth, why keep it under wraps? And some people say that's because the time wasn't right and he was going to be announced at the very end of his life and his death and his resurrection. And that was the time. And that was what he wanted, right? But wouldn't it have been more efficient to just start the movement and never tamp it down? Wouldn't it have been more efficient not to turn to the crowds and say things that shook them so hard that they would leave and he would keep whittling him down? I think that's part of it is that I don't think he saw himself. In fact, Mark 1:45, like when the news of all these miracles he was doing spread, it said Jesus could no longer enter a town openly because of his fame, but stayed outside in lonely places. Like, why not go in and like receive the praise of all the people? You're the Lord. You're God. You know, like why not go in and say, yep, that's right. You guys figured it out. Let's spread the word. Like, why did he go to the lonely places? And it says, yet the people still came to him from everywhere, because we're all still hero worshipers regardless. Even if he was trying very carefully not to turn this in, I think it's good. And that other point that we should pay attention to is every one of us who's following Jesus has important work to do that God has given to us to do. And sometimes I think like
It doesn't have to be glamorous.
but it will be more effective sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like I think I might, in like most of the groups I've led in young adult ministry, because it's dialogical, because we're talking together, because people can interrupt and say things, they never get beyond 30 or 40 people, right? They can't. Well, they could. I think I could take up a little bit, but they're never going to be 400 people. They're not going to be 300 people unless some people are only listening and other people are dialoguing, right? Like there's a limit to that, but it is so effective.
Yeah.
That I think, hold on, it
takes root.
I preached for years to a congregation that was 400 or 500 people, and I thought it didn't do as much, for example, just me personally, as it did to live life on life with these young adults where the trajectory of their lives was going to be massive over a lifetime, as opposed to people who mostly had already made up their mind that weren't going to change very much on a Sunday morning. But that can only be done in certain contexts. And this is why I think if we celebrate celebrity in the church, even if somebody doesn't fall, even if we aren't hitching ourselves to a person instead of to the Lord, we are letting people know that your ministry is okay. It doesn't really matter. And the Lord's thinking that one person you went after, or those 4 people that you really changed their life in this life really matter. And they're going to do things and it's going to multiply. And it is just as important. We always measure by numbers and by fame and by
you don't
downloads.
need the validation. You don't do those things for the validation.
Right. You are just as important. This is what the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians. He said, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth." Those would be the things that were like celebrity type things in his day. "But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God." I would pray for everybody who's got a large platform that you would live well, that your character would remain intact, that your discipleship to Jesus would be first and foremost in your life, and that your desire to mature your believers into real disciples would be there. And God has blessed you with a large platform. God has blessed you with all these things. We pray for everyone who has a large one or even a small platform, that we would all remain faithful to whatever God has given us, that we would all use it to the best of our abilities, and that we would really focus on the good of the persons that we're reaching and their depth, and not just the breadth of reaching so many, but to actually see people come deeper and deeper. Being a person who gathers a large crowd has inherent risks. One of them is that you'll water down the message to make sure that the crowd doesn't thin out. Jesus did not fall to that temptation. He did not fall that temptation. He turned to the disciples and said, "Are you going to leave me too?" when he would say the difficult things, right? And I think that's what we pray for everyone, whether you have 5, 10, 15, or 15,000 that are coming to hear whatever you're doing. We would say, may you be faithful to that over above everything else, that you would remain and not fall to the chief temptation, which is to keep cutting, like take shortcuts, not say things, edit things out so that the crowd doesn't thin out. Because ultimately we're called to preach and teach Christ in a certain way. And then we pray that's what people are doing. If you're somebody who's attending one of those churches, just do the examination that we keep doing. Like, where do I see this in the culture? Where do I see this in the church? What could this lead to? Where do I see it in myself? And what could I do that's a little bit different so that I'm not completely overwhelmed by this idol as it moves into our churches, and I would remain faithful. So we'd love to hear what you think. We'd love to hear an idol that you think we should talk about or a question that you have. This is Jesus versus America.
Follow us on all social media platforms at Jesus versus America, and find more resources on our official website, jesusversusamerica.com.